I want to thank you all so much for being here with me today. I'm glad to be here with you. My name is Luke Davidson. I'm the campus pastor here at the North Richland Hills campus, and today we're continuing in a series called Crazy Like Us. Every year in our church, we like to look back over the past year and see where we've come from and celebrate that a little bit, and also where we're going. This has been a very unique year for us at the North Richland Hills campus because it's our first year. We launched in January. We haven't even been here for a year yet, and so it's been a fun year. But our church, Compass in general, of which we are one of the campuses, Compass has been around for over 50 years. And so this is something that's just a good habit to refocus us on. What have we been able to do? Where are we going on into the future? And I talked about this last week, but if you missed it, we've been in an initiative called Uncharted, where $35 million was committed by church members just like you guys. And we've already raised over 30 million. We've already received over 30 million of that, which I think is worth celebrating. It's just phenomenal. That amount has blown the doors off of what we've been able to do as a church. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you again some of the things that we've been able to do, just to list these things out that we've been able to do through Uncharted. First off, just wanted to let you know, I don't know if you knew this, but Outreach Magazine recently reported, and I told you guys this last week, but they reported that we're the 76th fastest growing church in America out of all churches, all denominations, which is very cool. And you think about all of the resources financially that go towards growing something at that sort of pace. At the same time, our church has also been able to avoid and or eliminate $8 million in debt. And the things that we've tried to do, and as we've grown, we haven't had to pay interest in debt. We've been able to pay those things off because of your generosity. At the same time, we also gave $1 million to our missions partners across the world, in addition to what we already normally give them. And at the same time, we launched 2 new campuses, this being one of them, the other North Fort Worth campus, which launched in March. And our 2 campuses are running about 800 people every single Sunday. Isn't that crazy? It's phenomenal. And we've been able to do so much primarily because of the generosity of people like you. Now, most of the time when we think of giving, you think of like somebody trying to sell you, somebody standing up here with a mic, showing pictures of something and trying to break your heart and guilt you. Won't you give me your money? Stuff like that. And if that is how we had done this, we might have been able to do one of these things, maybe 2 of them. Like if we took every single Sunday and said, hey, we're trying to raise $8 million to pay off all our debt and to avoid debt. Let's do it. And I tried to guilt you and inspire you. Maybe we would have done that, but not all of these things. And there's many more things that don't even fit on this screen. No way we could have done all of it just by random acts of giving. The way we were able to do this is because of premeditated and calculated, thought out generosity. Many of you made it a priority and said, I'm going to commit this portion of who I am, not just as a response or as a reaction, like maybe if you convince me, I'll give it to you. No, you said it's a part from the start. It's going to be a part of who I am and what I do with my finances and with my money. It's totally blown the doors off of what we've been able to do as a church. And that's what we talked about last week. If you missed last week's message, make sure you go back and listen to it. But we basically just said generosity is more than just random acts of giving. We're all for random acts of giving. When your neighbor has a need, I hope that you can give. When the school's raising money, when there's a disaster and the church is trying to raise emergency relief funds, I hope that you will give toward that. But the generosity definition that we're working from in this series is not so much about randomly responding to needs. Here's the definition of generosity that we're working from. The premeditated, meaning that you have a plan. Calculated, meaning that you know the amount. Designated, meaning that you know where it's going. Emancipation, meaning that you have set it free. And what are you setting free? Your personal financial assets. We're not just talking about being generous with our time and with our relationships. We are specifically talking about being generous with money. Now, when you prepare and plan like that, you know what that enables you to do? To have margin in your life to be able to respond with random acts of giving. That when a need arises, now you're ready and you can do it. If you hadn't prepared, you wouldn't have any margin. You wouldn't have anything there in order to be a spontaneous giver. So you see how that kind of follows back and forth. So the problem that most of us face, 90% of us, we spend everything that we have so we don't have any margin. So we spend and we start this crazy cycle where we spend all of our money. Let's throw that, go ahead and, we spend everything, if not more than what we make. It's just what we do. And that leads us into debt. we get into debt over sometimes silly things that we didn't really need. We just wanted it, and we ended up going into debt because of it. And a lot of things, like because we didn't plan necessarily, the moment that you purchased it, the cost goes up and the value goes down because your interest or financing or whatever. And so you're spending more on something that is immediately losing value as soon as you drive it off the lot, as soon as you take it off the shelf. And this happens sometimes, right? You get a car that you didn't really need. You just wanted it because you're having a midlife crisis or something like that. And so you're like, well, I can't afford it, but I'll just finance it. And then you get a few months into it, and like this isn't really satisfying me like I thought it would. Maybe another car would, so you get another car, and you start financing that one, and then you get caught in this cycle. Or the iPhone. Last year we had the iPhone X, right? Rapid advancement in technology. They eliminated the home button. Whoa, there's no more home button. And this year we've got the iPhone XR. What's different? It's got an R at the end, right? So some of you are like, easy, Luke, let it up. You just got it takes better pictures. Okay, if you want to keep telling yourself that. But maybe you wanted it so bad and it's over $1,000 and you couldn't really afford it. And so you said, well, I want it so bad, I'll just throw it on the credit card. And I'll pay it off later. I'll figure it out later. And you get caught spending more than you make. Now you've got debt. And that sort of debt leaves you with almost little to no margin in your life. You've got no financial margin. And if you don't have any wiggle room in your finances, it's something to worry about. And what are you worried about? You're worried about, am I going to have what I need? Will I have enough? What if I can't do this? What if I can't get married? What if I can't buy a house? What if I can't send my kids to pay for their college? And on and on and on. What if? We're worried about future consumption. So what do? This crazy thing where we spend more than we make, and then it sends us into debt, and we've got no margin, and so we worry about, what are we worried about? Our future consumption, and so we consume more than we have, which puts us in consumer debt. Now we've got no margin for future consumption, and we worry, and it just goes around and around. This is the American way. This is what we do. And what drives this is a mindset that it just assumes that, hey, if it comes to me, it's for me. It's for me to spend on myself. I got to figure out how to spend it. And I hope that I have enough to spend on myself. I need more and more and more and more. I'll spend it. The cycle spirals. And it doesn't matter how much money you add to this. You can just add money to the cycle. You're just spending more money than you did before, more than you make. Now you've got more debt, less margin, more worry. You just add a zero to it. Another year goes by. You get a raise. You spend more than you make, you go into debt, you don't have margin, you start to worry, and the cycle goes around and around and around again and again. So the question that we're asking ourselves today, well, how much more money would you need to break the habit of spending more than you make? How much more money would you need to say, I'm going to get out of debt and stay out of debt? If I had that amount of money, I would stay out. How much more money would you need to actually have margin in your finances? How much more money would you need to feel like I'm not going to worry about anything anymore? I don't have to worry anymore. How much more would it be? 10% more? 20%? What if you went into work tomorrow and you said, and your boss told you, said, hey, congratulations, you got a 25% raise. You're like, man, that's great. And you went home and you told your mom and dad, because you still live at home. No, you went home, you said, I'm just kidding. You said to your spouse or your friend or your roommate, and you said, hey, I just got a 25% raise. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. I'm going to pay off my debt. I'll have margin in my life. I won't worry. Man, this is going to be great. Here's the reality, though. How much more would you need to stop your habit of spending more than you make? More than you'll ever get at one time. Let's just be honest. Like 99.9% of us, you're not going to get a 25% raise tomorrow. What happens is maybe you get a raise next year, but you spend it immediately. That's what happens. You just add a zero to your spending, you add a zero to your debt, the cycle just repeats. Another year goes by, the cycle repeats itself again, you spend more than you make. Even if you did get 25% more, just like that, like maybe something crazy happens and you get some sort of promotion or investment just goes bonkers, it's great, 25% more. I bet that you'd spend all of it. You know how I know this? Go look at people who win the lottery. 2016, Teresa Murray reported that 70% of people who win the lottery will go bankrupt. 70%. And these aren't just people who got 25% more than they made all at one time. They got 25 times more than what they made all at one time. 50 times more what they made all at one point. But you know what also followed? Spending 25 times more than they'd ever spent before. You just added a zero and it went crazy. They had no self-control and they ended up getting back into the crazy cycle. And sometimes the worst thing can ever happen to you is win the lottery, because you just destroy all your family relationships. People begin to want to ask and parasite off of you, and it destroys families, destroys relationships. But we still think that getting a lot of money would solve all of our problems. It's the crazy cycle. You will never get enough to break the cycle of spending more than you have, going into debt, having no margin, and just being totally consumed and worrying about it. This cycle is not a money problem. There's a lot of little problems underneath of it that are core. Spending more than you make, if you had more money, you would still spend it. It's a self-control problem. Your debt, having things that you just wanted and go into debt for it, is a contentment problem. Are you satisfied with what you need and what you have? Margin is not a money problem, it's a discipline problem. And worry is not a money problem, it's a spiritual problem. The Apostle Paul, who was a guy who saw Jesus after Jesus came back to life, after he had been killed, raised from the dead. Paul's like, I got to tell people about this. And he goes and he's telling people about Jesus came back to life. Jesus came back to life. He starts all these churches in these different cities. All these people worried about money just like you and I do. And you know what Paul taught him? He said, you worry about money because you trust in riches rather than trusting in the one who richly provides. That's kind of a core thing. Do we trust money or do we trust God? What is your Savior? What's going to save you? Some of you are like, man, money's going to take care of me. If you had 15% more just right now, do you think you'd stop worrying? 50% more? You're wrong, because there's people in here that make 50% more than you. They still worry. There's people in here that make 100% more than you. They still worry. Pastor Andy Stanley, he's a pastor of a church in Atlanta, Georgia called North Point. We're a partner church with them. He told a story about one night he was at a banquet and he just happened to get to sit at a dinner table with a couple that were billionaires. And he knew of them through a friend of a friend. He was excited to actually get to hang out with them and to talk and to glean some of the wisdom. You know, they'd obviously made really wise investments and done things really well. And so eventually the conversation went to money. And he said he couldn't believe that even they, after talking about money for a little bit, started to talk about, well, you never know. What if this happens? You got to diversify your investments. What if you get sick and you worry? And Andy Stanley said after the dinner, he got in his car with his wife and he said, if they don't know, there is no hope for us. I mean, if you can see it in their eyes that they're worried and what if this happens? And well, you never know. There's no point in us of even pretending that we'll ever know. And yet we get caught up in this cycle of worrying. What if, how do you know when this happens and so on and so forth? We get caught up in this crazy cycle. Financial craziness, where we think that money is the solution. Money's going to solve all our problems. You just add a zero to it and the contentment is still lost. You add a zero to it, the spending just goes up again and again and again. Now here's the tough part that may be a little offensive, okay? Jesus called this cycle greed. Some of you are like, oh, ouch. Jesus called this cycle greed. That feels hard because you're like, not me, because you can't see greed in the mirror. When you think of greed, you think of some rich dude counting all of his gold in his basement like Donald Duck's Uncle Scrooge, you know, just swimming through seas of gold. Nobody does that. We think of greed, we think of some Victorian era woman sitting on a bed surrounded by priceless pieces of art and stacks of jewelry and cash. Nobody does that. No, greed is the person who has a little amount, a medium amount, or a large amount. The amount doesn't really matter. But greed is the person who has any amount, but they just assume that it all belongs to them. It all belongs to me, and it's all for me. It's mine. That's what Jesus called greed. And greed leads to that crazy cycle where you spend it all on yourself, you consume more than you can afford, you get into consumer debt, you got no margin for future consumption, and you worry about future consumption. It just takes over your life because you just assume, if it came to me, it's for me. And it leads to discontentment, no matter how many zeros you add to it. The answer to this is generosity. Generosity breaks the crazy cycle. Not just randomly giving when people inspire you or motivate you or guilt you or exhaust you. And you're like, fine, I'll take, this little bit. This is all mine, but I guess because of the crying kid in the video, I'll give some of what I'll give it to you and begrudgingly, and now you feel guilt and you don't enjoy it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about building your life from the ground up foundationally and saying, this is an opportunity. If it came to me, maybe it's not necessarily for me. You start to think differently. Instead of assuming, hey, it came to me, it's for me, and that's sort of greed, you start to think differently and see, if it came to me, maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's for me to distribute to others who need it. If it came to me, it's not necessarily for me. Now, next week, I'm going to get real practical, and I'm going to try to teach step by step how to begin to build your life around generosity. And it might take time. We also have a course in our church called Financial Peace University. It starts in a couple months, and I would encourage you to check it out. Start to build the pieces where over time you can start to have these steps built into your life to build your life around generosity. But I'm telling you what, if you don't change the way that you think, it won't matter the steps that we implement. Because at some point you'll get worried about future consumption, and you'll start to consume more than you make, and you'll go into debt, and you won't have any margin, and you'll get worried again, and the cycle will just engulf you back in. So you have to change the way that you think. Have to learn and teach yourself, man, if it comes to me, doesn't necessarily mean that it's for me. One day Jesus was walking with his disciples, and he told them a parable. He made up a story in order to make a point. It's in Luke chapter 12. And so he turns and he says, once upon a time, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So even 2,000 years ago, the rich got richer. Right? It's just the way it works, right? This guy has a bumper crop. He's got more than he's ever had before. And so this is what he thought to himself. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. He's got a problem, right? What am I going to do with all my stuff? And there's all these people starving. But what am I going to do with all my stuff? I got to get a storage unit. I got to build a bigger house for myself to store all my stuff. Maybe I'll build another house. I think it should probably be in Miami, close to the beach, because that's a good place to store stuff. And I thought that was funny. You didn't. But you said this is exactly what he does. What am I going to do with all of my stuff? And so the next slide says, he said to himself, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger ones. Then I can store all my surplus grain. It's problem solved. Then I'll have plenty. You have plenty, I'll say to myself. Plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. This guy's like, I'm golden. I'm good. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. Interesting. If you were to think back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, if somebody had come up to you 30 years ago and said, this is how much money you'll be making today. If 30 years ago, you wouldn't have believed it, right? You'd be like, are you kidding me? That's fantastic. Are you lying? Because if I have that, I won't worry about anything, and I certainly won't have any debt. And I'm going to be generous. I don't want to hoard all that for myself. I want to give it to other people. And yet year after year went by, and spending went up a little bit, and debt, and needs happened, and things just occurred randomly, and now here you are. And you still have worry, and you still have discontentment in your life because nothing changed. You just assumed, hey, if it comes to me, it's for me. And nothing changed with the way that you actually planned and operated your finances. If it comes to me, it's for me. Same as the guy in our story. He just said, I'll store it up for myself, and I won't have to worry about anything. But then the story changes in verse 20. Then God said to him, you fool, not because he was rich, but because he was confused about why he had even been given this and what he was supposed to do with it. You fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Uh-oh. You got a lot of stuff, but you don't have a lot of years. You thought all this stuff guaranteed that you'd have time to enjoy all of the stuff. Not necessarily. Uh-oh. Now your life has been demanded from you, and who's going to get all the stuff? Somebody else. That's the obvious answer. Somebody else, it's theirs to consume now. Uh-oh. And this is how it will be, whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. All of his stuff taken away. Now who gets it? Somebody else. Not because he gave it away, not because he was generous, because he was dead. It's gone. And somebody else's now. He had consumed and all of this stuff that he thought was for his disposal. You think about those two words, consumable, disposable income, those words that we use with money sometimes. Disposable, it's a word that means to throw stuff away. I can just dispose it. Consumable means something you throw in a fire and it consumes it. Imagine going to a third world country with a stack of cash and saying, hey, this is my 6 months disposable consumable income. I just throw it away. I just burn it. And they'd be like, you are crazy. You're crazy. We get caught in the crazy cycle. And this guy assumed that it was all for him, my consumption, my disposal. And at the end of the story, he was consumable. He was disposable. And now who's going to get all the stuff that he thought was for him? It's somebody else's to consume. And then Jesus closes out the story there at the end, that final sentence on there. Steps out of the parable and he looks me in the eye, and he says, listen, this is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. This is how it will be. Total loss. Nothing to show for it. This is how it will be for anyone who stores up things for themselves. And you just said, it's for me to consume, for me to hoard, and you're never content, you're never happy, you're begrudging, you feel guilt because of it. You store up things for yourself, but it's not rich towards God. That phrase, rich towards God, what does that mean? Does that mean come to church every week? I hope you come to church every week. Does that mean read your Bible and pray daily? I hope you do. Those are good things. But he literally just said what that means. He literally just told us the story where being rich towards God means not storing your wealth and your money and your stuff up for yourself, but giving it away to others. That's being rich towards God. Like we don't have to read into it. It's pretty obvious right there. And I just want to say it this way. If you wanted to be rich towards me, Pastor Luke, you know what you could do? Just love my wife and kids. You can be generous to them. In fact, I'd rather that you be generous to them. That's what I really want anyway. And I think the same is true for you. If you're a parent or a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or an older brother or older sister, if people love the people that you love, it's like they're loving you. And our Heavenly Father, who owns everything and who needs nothing, saying, listen, if you'll be rich to my kids across the world, if you'll be rich to your neighbors, if you'll be rich towards the people sitting around you, it's like you're being rich towards me. That's what he wants. And generous people get this. That's why our church is able to do so much, because there's so many people in this room who you understand that if it comes to you, it's not necessarily for you. It might be for somebody else. In fact, it probably is for somebody else. And you start to get this. Generous people don't assume that it's theirs to consume. Generous people start to think, hey, if it comes to me, maybe it's not necessarily for me. I mean, Jesus just shredded our notion of ownership anyway. He said, listen, if it can be taken away from you just like that, you didn't really own it anyway. It can be taken away. You thought you could control it. You wrote it down in your will. You set up a fund or whatever. You can control it for a generation or so, but at some point, it's out of your control and it's somebody else's to consume at that point. And you have to start to live in a different way that says, you know what? This isn't necessarily mine. God is the owner. I want to manage it really well. I want to be really good at being rich with this stuff that God has given to me. I want to be really good at it. I've got it temporarily. A few years, decades go by, it'll go on to somebody else. So I want us to walk out of here knowing this, that I am not the owner. Let's go to the next one. I am not the owner. Let's all say this out loud together on three. You ready? 1, 2, 3. I am not the owner. Some of you are like, yes, I am. Okay? Just pretend. Okay? Just pretend. Here we go. Say it one more time. I am not the owner. You have to start to think differently. And some of you have learned that lesson the hard way. Like you lost everything and learned that you're not the owner, maybe because of a divorce. Or maybe because your company collapsed or your investments just tanked and you lost everything. Or maybe you know somebody who did and you or someone you know lost everything. You may have lost more than some of us will make in our entire lifetimes. And you learned real quick, man, I guess I thought it was mine, but it was taken away from me just like that. I guess I'm not really the owner. Others of us will learn this lesson the hard way, just like in the parable that Jesus told us, because someone dies, someone that you love passes away. And now their stuff isn't really theirs anymore. You go through their house and you see all their stuff, you think, I guess they don't own it anymore. When I was 12 years old, my grandfather passed away, and he lived in the house right next to us, 5-acre yard out in front of the house. And my grandpa had so much stuff. And I'll never forget, we brought this company in to help us liquidate my grandfather's stuff. And they had all these tents and tables and platforms, auction platforms out and covering the whole yard with all of his possessions just displayed out everywhere. And all these people coming and buying and trading and auctioning and selling and giving stuff away. It was sort of traumatic for a little kid to see that play out. And I'll never forget just thinking, man, I guess it's like we don't really own anything. We manage it for a few years, decades. It feels like a long time to us, but at some point it passes on and now it's somebody else's to consume. Ownership is a myth. God is the owner. You're the manager. If it comes to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's for you. Let's be good at handling the things that God has given to us. So this week, over the next 7 days, next Sunday, we're going to give you a plan. I'm going to give you a plan how to start to organize your life around generosity. But this week, I just want you to imagine, what would it be like to think, I'm not the owner? And when someone asks you for something, to be generous, an opportunity to share. And that crazy part of you wants to be like, oh, it's mine. What if they break it? What if I don't have enough? You just say, that's the crazy, thinking that if I have enough stuff, that I'm going to stop worrying. What a joke. And you give it and you say, I'll double it. I'll double it. Just to prove that this is not controlling me. And maybe when you walk through your house, you just start to think differently. And you start to think, you know what? One day somebody's going to walk through here and box all this stuff up and trade it, sell it, auction it, throw it away, burn it. Who knows what they're going to do with it? It sounds sad, but it's true. You're not the owner. And thinking that you are, that it's all for you, is going to drive you back to the crazy cycle. The crazy cycle that says it's for me, I got to spend it all, I got to hoard it. You'll never be content. You can live this way, but you'll never be content. You'll always be frustrated. You'll always worry. There's a better way to be crazy. We're going to teach it to you next Sunday. Part 4 of Crazy Like Us. But you got to change the way that you think. Make sure that you're back here next week. Thank you guys so much.